Hi theory students. Today we're going to be reviewing triad construction, how to build triads, and then triad inversion. What happens when the triads are not in the original construction position? Triads are three notes built on a root with the other notes either a major third or a minor third above the previous note. So we would call the bottom note the root, the next note up we'd call the third of the triad, and the next note up the fifth of the triad. There are four different types of qualities of triads possible. A major triad has a major third above the root, and then a minor third above that next note. The minor triad reverses that. The minor third comes first above the root and then a major third. The diminished triad consists of two minor thirds, one after the other, and the augmented triad, two major thirds, one after the other. I'll show you an example using the note C as the root. Here in this example on the left, we call this a C major chord. C because that's the root, major because from C to E is a major third, and then from E to G is a minor third. You may notice also that the distance then from the C up to the G is a perfect fifth. So the root C, the third E, the fifth G, C major. In the C minor chord next to it, C to E flat is a minor third, E flat to G is a major third. So we take each of our thirds, major and minor, but do them in the opposite order that we did them in the major triad. Note, by the way, that from C up to G here is still a perfect fifth. If we go directly below that minor triad, now we have a minor third, C to E flat, and another minor third, E flat to G flat. Both minor thirds. We call this a diminished triad. One way to think of a diminished triad, they don't have diminished thirds in them, but the fifth that we get from C up to G flat is a diminished fifth, and that matches the name of the triad. On the bottom left, C up to E, major third, E up to G sharp, also a major third, but note that from C to G sharp is an augmented fifth. So we call that an augmented triad. C major, C minor, C diminished, C augmented. If we're only using major and minor thirds to construct these triads, you can see that these are the only four types that are possible. And we can construct this on any note as the root. We don't have to start on C. We can start on F sharp, we can start on D, we can start on A flat. Any note can be the root of a triad. In actual pieces, triads may be played one note at a time in a melody or accompaniment. So I can have a melody playing the C major triad, or I can have an accompaniment that plays the notes one at a time, or as a block chord. And just as a scale that's based on a tonic for construction but may actually start on any note, So if we have a scale, when we actually get a piece, we don't have to start on C every time we have a scale passage. With triads, it's the same thing. When we actually hear a triad, they don't have to start on the root as the first note or even the bottom note. When we talk about what note is actually the bottom note that we're hearing, we can talk about what we call inversions of triads. So since triads consist of a root, a third, and a fifth, we have ways to describe the position based on which note is the lowest. And the lowest note of a triad we call the bass note. We call it the bass note whether it's written in treble clef or bass clef. If the bass note is the root of the triad, we say that it's in root position. So here, when I write this C major chord that way, that's root position. If the third of the chord is the bass note, we call that first inversion. So here, E is the third of this C major chord, and that's first inversion. And finally, if the fifth of the chord is in the bass, we call that second inversion. And this concept works no matter what the quality of the triad. So if the fifth of the chord G is the bottom note, second inversion. And this would be true whether it was C major, C minor, C diminished, or C augmented. I just showed you this with the major chord. We can also identify these inversions by counting the intervals from the bass up to each of the other notes of the chord. We will get the intervals of a 5 and a 3 in a root position chord, a 6 and a 3 in a first inversion, and a 6 and a 4 in a second inversion. Let's go back and look at those triads on the staff to check this out. So here we go. From C up to G in the root position is a fifth. From C up to E in the root position is a third. From E up to C in a root position is a sixth. First inversion rather is a sixth. From E up to G in a first inversion is a third. And from G up to E in a second inversion is a sixth. From G up to C in a second inversion is a fourth. So we can label these inversions either with the names root, first inversion, second inversion, or with figures 5-3, 6-3, or 6-4. Commonly, the 5 and 3 are usually left out, and we assume root position. In a 6-3 position, we sometimes leave the 3 out, and when you just see a 6, it refers to a 6-3. But the 6-4, we have to leave both numbers in there. And finally, if you encounter a triad either spread out or otherwise not arranged like the neat root third fifth, try to imagine which note would begin the stack of thirds in order to find the root and then to identify the quality. So if I had a chord like that, even though they're not in that closed position, I can still imagine if that E were brought down an octave, now it's in the familiar root position with C as the root. Likewise, even over two staves, if I kind of picture which of those three would begin a stack of thirds, it wouldn't be this one, because that's a fourth. It wouldn't be that one, that's a fourth. But if I put it in that way, I can see I've got C, E, G, and then it's a C major chord. It so happens that this one has the third of the chord E in the bass, so this is a C major chord in first inversion. Stay tuned in the next part where we'll talk about triads in keys, and then some shortcuts for identifying the quality of the triads.